I'm Doug Lichtman, and this is the second of our videos on trade secret law. Last time I introduced the big ideas. We talked about what a trade secret is. It's something that gets economic value from not being generally known, and something that is the subject of reasonable precautions. We talked about what misappropriation is, these definitions about unlawful disclosure or use or acquisition of these secrets. And we talked about improper means, the ways you're not allowed to go ahead to get access, to get this information. This time, I want to dig in more deeply. I want to show you a few examples to really make sure that these ideas land. And then I want to pivot to talk to you about how contract law works with trade secret law to actually achieve these goals. Let's get started. Most cases, the first thing you're going to ask when you're thinking about a trade secret case is you're going to ask, do I really have a secret? And sometimes the cases mess this up. My favorite example, maybe years ago on Facebook, you played Farmville. I won't hold it against you. It seems kind of silly in the rearview mirror. But there was this game that lots of people liked. You'd go on Facebook, you'd get some sheep, you'd trade the sheep with other people, you'd raise hay, whatever you were doing. It was some sort of fun, simple simulation about farming. And there was a dispute because it turns out there had been a prior Facebook game called Farm Town, which was very similar. They also had sheep, they also had hay, they had a lot of the same dynamics. And apparently the team who ultimately came out with Farmville, which was the very successful one, they went and visited the men and women who had created Farm Town before them. And so before they rolled out Farmville, they had signed some paperwork, done some looking. It looked like maybe they were thinking of buying the company behind Farmtown. But in any case, they got together, no deal happened, and a few months later, boom, Farmville comes out. The folks behind Farmtown sued on a trade secret theory, and they said, hey, you came, you saw behind the curtain, and you learned that we had cows, and you learned that we had hay, and you learned the general dynamics of our game. And of course, that's not a good trade secret case, because everyone who had played Farmtown on Facebook, and it wasn't a huge number of people, but it was a bunch, everyone who had played Farmtown on Facebook, they knew those things too. They just weren't secrets. Now, in that instance, the team changed lawyers, they refiled the case, and they then delivered a much better story. They said that the folks behind Farmville had come to visit the company behind Farmtown, and had talked in detail about how Farmtown had designed the computer technology such that it could play a game on Facebook. Because if you think about how Facebook was designed, its purpose to let you put up a post, put up a picture, give some likes, things like this, it wasn't designed to be a fast-paced, interactive game environment. And in this second version of the suit, our secret was that. Like, how did we set up the servers? What did we do for the flow of information so we could take a platform not really designed for gaming and make a game of this sort? And then they litigated, and the actual details of the case aren't really exciting to you and me. I mainly wanted to point out to you, you need a secret. In every case, there's some challenges, because if I have a secret and I think you stole it, and I want to sue you, I still might be nervous to say my secret out loud. Or even to say my secret in a sealed court document that your lawyers obviously will get to see. Which is to say, when I'm fighting over secrecy, I worry, man, what if you don't actually know my secret? I don't want to, by accident, tell you my secret when I sue you. There are also lots of procedural and definitional hiccups along the way. Sometimes my secret is actually just a big mess of ideas, and it's hard for the business team and the lawyers to articulate, my secret is, and to define it. But of course, the courts at some point demand that we do that. Some courts demand it really early in the process. Some courts give us a little bit of room to kind of feel the case out before we have to do it. But defining the secret is sometimes messy. It's got to be a secret. But actually writing down your secret sometimes is not an easy task, and it leads to these cases being hard to litigate. And also, you got to be really careful about litigating things you don't want anyone else to know. Second thing we tend to talk about in these cases is, did you take adequate precautions? Remember, trade secret law protects information that gets its economic value from being secret. But the only information that counts is information where you can show you've taken adequate, reasonable precautions. You can't say, it's my secret and I left it out on top of my desk all day. You've got to have taken precautions. And we fight in these cases about how significantly should you invest in precautions. Remember, you only have a trade secret case when your precautions failed. So right away you walk in and you have to admit, gosh, I did these things, and clearly in hindsight it wasn't enough. Moreover, there's almost always something more you could have done. The other side, well, why didn't you? And they suggest something that maybe doesn't sound crazy. And so figuring out what makes a precaution reasonable, it's important inside the case. It's also important as we advise clients, because a lot of the advice for trade secret law is before there's a problem. What should we do? Remembering that precautions can be expensive. Precautions can also get in the way of your own beneficial use of your secret. I don't want to lock everything up and have a bunch of guards and have a bunch of safes and write it in code. And at some point, I want you to use it for your business. And so there's a rich set of questions to think about of what are the precautions I should take. And there are themes in the cases. One thing we might look at is there's something you could have done that's relatively cheap that would obviate the need to litigate these things. Put up a fence. Don't let people come on your property and then run out with the lawyers and go sue them. Put up a fence. It's easy, it's cheap, likely to be effective in a lot of situations. Put up a fence. Another thing we might look at is, are there some precautions where it's a good signal to other folks? A fence is a good signal, but there are things like a neon sign, a label. Maybe I mark the document confidential. It doesn't stop you from looking at it, but it warns you this is a secret. Maybe I'll mark it. Maybe it's about notice, at least in part. Was there an inexpensive way you could have warned other folks, your employees, your counterparties? You could have warned them, this thing, it's important to me. This is a secret. Fences might do that too. There'll be some overlaps. We're cautious about this one because I don't want you to too easily qualify for trade secret protection. And what I'm thinking here is, if all you need to do is stamp the document, big secret, well, you're going to buy a stamper and you're going to you're going to stamp every document, big secret, because that's cheap and easy. And wow, I don't want you to do that. I want to make sure that when you put a little stamp that says it's a secret, I want you to use that appropriately sparingly. And so we'll look to see what you do. Could you have easily given us better notice? Did you overdo it? Those kinds of questions. Relatedly, I might ask how much money you spent on your precautions. To some degree, I don't want you to waste a lot of money on precautions, but at the same time, I want to make it that you can't qualify everything. That's my point about the stamper. It's a richer point. If precautions are dirt cheap, then sure, check the box, you'll do them. And what, we're going to let all that stuff come into this form of protection? I'd rather not. And so in addition to looking for things that might be effective, like my fence, might give clear notice, like my sign, I might just look for things that force you to burn money as a credible sign that you were thinking of this as one of your secrets. Lastly, sometimes my precautions are great because they show that improper means were taken. When I have a lock and a chain and you break it, that's great evidence that you engaged in breaking and entering. You knew, the lock signaled to you, but even more importantly, like the broken lock tells me someone broke in. You did something wrong. And so sometimes I'll be looking for that also. There are a lot of other things, I just wanted to give you a taste, but we have to kind of talk through both in the strategy part as we're advising clients and in the litigation part, what precautions did you take? What precautions could you have taken? What are the trade-offs? Like, what would those do for us? At what cost? At what restriction in the flow of information? What are the trade-offs? Is what you did reasonable? Now, I actually intellectually really love this theme of trade secret law because it raises for me a question about law more generally. Why don't we always ask you to take reasonable precautions? Think of when you have a car. If your car is stolen and you call the police, somebody stole my car, we never come back and ask, well, hang on, did you lock your doors? It's a totally reasonable precaution to ask you to lock your doors as a way of discouraging folks from stealing your car. Yet we don't require it. Trade secret law does. The definition of a trade secret asks, did you take reasonable precautions? If you didn't, it is not a trade secret. Yet in my car example, we don't ask you about locking the door, leaving the keys on the seat. We don't ask you these questions. So too for trespass. If you call the cops, somebody's on my property, help. They don't say, do you have a fence? They don't say, do you have a sign? It's interesting, trade secret law is one of the only areas of law where to qualify for protection, we ask, did you take on self-help? Did you do a little bit on your own? If you did, at some point we'll step in and help you. We're happy to come help you. But we ask, what did you do as a precondition? And we don't do that in these other examples. And it's not crazy. Think back to cars. In addition to locking your car, you might remember there was a time when everyone was buying, what do they call it? The club. It was a big metal stick you could hook to your steering wheel as you were getting out of your car. And it made it so that if someone else got in the car and couldn't unlock the stick, it was really hard to turn the steering wheel. The stick would hit the windshield, hit the door, hit the windshield, hit the door. It was called the club, and it discourages folks from stealing cars. If you had a club locked on your steering wheel, the statistics showed us that folks were much less likely to try to steal your vehicle. It might be a reasonable precaution, and we didn't ask you to do it. And indeed, very quickly we realized, man, I actually don't want you to do that one, because all that one did is, the bad guy would come up, he'd see your car, had the club, he'd see the car next to you, did not, so okay, he'd steal the car next to you. Not great. Then we moved to LoJack. LoJack was the system where hidden in the vehicle was, in essence, a transmitter that if your car was stolen, the police could quickly locate the vehicle. This one was great because even if 20–30% of people in our community did it, now the bad guys walk over to a car and they think, well, that car might have LoJack. Maybe I shouldn't bother. It was not visible, it was not readily detectable, so this is a powerful precaution. And my point to you is, interestingly, we don't make people do them. Towns did subsidize LoJack. They would kick in money to encourage people in their community to do this because it was shown to really reduce auto theft. Awesome. But we didn't require it. Just interesting to think about when the law demands us to help ourselves before the law will help us. I think the answer is, one, that we want to stop every car theft. We don't want to have situations say, well, that one's okay because they didn't lock their doors. We have a sense that we always want to enforce these rules. So too with trespass. Moreover, I think we worry that in the moment when you call the cops, if we say, oh, I'm sorry, you didn't lock your doors, we won't help you, that what you'll do is you'll now actually take the law in your own hands. You'll grab a baseball bat, a weapon, and you'll go try to straighten this out on your own. And we certainly don't want that. And so if the choice is help you even though you were sloppy versus don't help you and maybe set up a bad interaction, fine, we come and help you. But again, interesting, trade secret law does something we don't often see. One more point I want to make to you about reasonable precautions, and it comes from a case involving the chemical company DuPont. DuPont was building a brand new manufacturing facility, and their manufacturing process was a really important secret. And so as they were building, they had fences, they had a security guy at the door. He would stop the contractors, check that they were supposed to be there. Great. The bad guys hire someone to fly an airplane over the site, taking photos. And then the bad guy uses the photos to figure out what the manufacturing process was. Litigation ensues. The court ultimately says you don't have to put a tarp over your construction site to hide it from view. It's a reasonable precaution to have a fence and check people, and if then some bad guy flies over, we're going to let the precaution be deemed to have sufficed. Even though in the case, the party who paid the person to fly over said they could have done something. They could have built a roof, they could have thrown a tarp, and I'll point out to you, they could have done a bunch of other stuff. When you're building one of these facilities, maybe you add a bunch of fake pipes and you run hot water through 3 of them and cold water through 2 of them, totally throwing off what it looks like to outsiders. You could do a bunch of stuff. The court, interestingly, in this case said, look, although we can imagine these other things, reasonable precautions. And I love the case because of not that holding, that's kind of straightforward and not so interesting, but because I can then ask you to think about what you think happened next. So the next time that DuPont is building and they have their crane and they're building their mountain facilities and whatever, well, first of all, what do you think the bad guys do? They fly a plane still, they just do it a little further away, hoping that DuPont won't notice. Because remember, the only reason we got the first case is somebody flew over, somebody on the ground said, why is that plane circling? And boom, we got a case, we litigated, we figured it out, and away we went. When the court rules, great. After the ruling, what are you going to do? Did the DuPont lawyers say, and don't worry about this next time, I'm sure we'll notice again? No way. DuPont now has to think about tarps and fake pipes, and our bad guy has to think about flying higher using a telescopic lens. There's a little bit of an arms race here. Even if the court calls a case and says, you did wrong, you were okay. On the ground, I can't imagine that we, in our business roles, we as advisors are going to say, yeah, I'm aware of that precaution, it would really help, but the court said I don't have to do it. No way. Which indeed comes back to something I said in the prior video. Remember in the prior video I told you that there are kind of two big purposes to trade secret law. One, the second one in my slide, is the easy one. It encourages investment in things that are trade secrets. Just like copyright law encourages the creation of work of authorship, patent law encourages investments in new innovations, trade secret law encourages investment in trade secrets. Great, that one's easy. But I said maybe there's this other cool thing, that it's reducing wasteful precautions. Because the law says you don't need to do that. You can be reasonable, and at that point, pencils down will protect you. The DuPont example maybe suggests that that story doesn't really work. Are we able to stop people from engaging in wasteful precaution that is unreasonable, that we wish they didn't do? I don't know. In the DuPont case, I wish they didn't build a tarp, but they will. And I wish they didn't run empty pipes and then fill them with hot and cold water to throw off thermal imaging. But now that I've suggested it to you, you will. And so I don't know that we really achieve number one super effectively, because in the push and pull, there really is an arms race. And arms races are just really hard for law to stop. We can try to influence it, try to shape it, but stop it, really hard. We're going through the big questions of a trade secret fight. Do you have a secret? Did you take reasonable precautions? Next on my list is, were the means improper? If someone came and got access to the secret, took the secret, how did they do it? And did they do it in a way that's forbidden under the law? And some things are forbidden under the law, and they're also forbidden on their own. Breaking and entering is illegal. It's also an improper means of getting access to a secret. Bribery, nope, not allowed to do it. And by the way, it's also an improper means of getting a secret. Those ones I think resonate. Those are easy stories to tell. There are some things that are proper means. Reverse engineering being a really important one. It is not improper to acquire your competitor's product, to take a hammer, smash it into pieces, and go figure it out. Reverse engineering, studying the other guy to learn their secrets, we say that's okay. And we could argue back and forth about how great that is. On the one hand, it's learning. It leads to innovation. I get access, I learn your secret, maybe I improve on it. It also, I'm not worried about your fisticuffs, because it's happening, I'm buying your product, going to my own place of business and doing the work there. I'm not breaking and entering, I'm not interacting with your employees. There's something to be said about it in those dimensions. On the other hand, it does cause parties to engage in precautions. Knowing that you can reverse engineer might make me do a bunch of things to make that hard. I understand the law won't help me, but I might be able to help myself. Indeed, this is an example I've given before about Microsoft's Xbox. Microsoft, in the copyright context, had a lot of trouble stopping people from buying games, reverse engineering, and making unlicensed, unofficial games that work with the Xbox. So what they do? Did they say, reverse engineering, nothing I can do about it? No way. They instead said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make the operating system unbelievably complicated. You want to try to go figure it out on your own? Good luck with that. You'll put out a game, and we have all these little complexities buried that at some point, 90 minutes into your game, boom, the blue screen of death. Haha. They could do things to make reverse engineering harder. They also moved game distribution to try to do it almost exclusively, if they can, on their own network. You plug an internet cord into your Xbox and buy your games that way, because then they can control which games are authorized and which aren't. Reverse engineering leads to precautions. It doesn't lead to parties saying, fine, go figure out my secrets. Messy, some trade-offs. The law is clear on it. We allow reverse engineering. The law has held pretty clearly that we think the benefits, the learning, the competition, outweighs the harms. Some stuff, just harder to know. States aren't sure. Some go this way, some go that way. An example for you of that is dumpster diving. Going through someone's garbage might not be illegal. In a lot of places, you forfeit your privacy interest in anything you throw in the garbage. Okay. Not crazy to say that, I guess. But then we might say, look, even though it's not illegal, we don't want you to get secrets that way. We'd like you to get secrets by reverse engineering. We'd like you to just straight up compete. But sending a team to put on rubber gloves and dig through the coffee rinds to find the secret documents that should have been shredded, by the way, but to find the secret documents, I don't like that. And indeed, back to my point to you about the two purposes of trade secret law, I questioned one of them a few minutes ago. Now I'll question whether 2 is the right number, because there is a story of trade secret law that says there are 3, where the third one is to encourage commercial morality. Dumpster diving, I just don't want that. Like, we want competition, capitalism, great, but come on. Some stuff is gross, and we don't want that. It's immoral, and we don't want it. And trade secret law could list those things as improper means. And maybe that's a great story of why dumpster diving, even if not itself illegal, might be an improper means in the trade secret context. I told you at the start I wanted to add some detail to our big ideas in trade secret law. That was the first run of slides. The other thing I want to do in this video is talk explicitly about contracts, because contracts are a really important piece of trade secret law. One reason they're important is the contract can be my precaution. And so it might be when you ask me, did you take reasonable precautions? I say, yes. Every time I made a deal with some potential partner, I have them sign a document telling them I'm about to share a secret. Treat it as a secret. You can't use it with others. Contracts were my precaution. All my employees, I had all of them also sign documents acknowledging that's my secret and so on. Contracts can be my precaution. It also can be the basis of my lawsuit, in addition to or instead of trade secret law, if we sign a contract where you promised not to reveal my secret and you did, I can sue you for breach of contract. And maybe those remedies will work just fine for me, and I don't have to do the trade secret piece, proving up all that. I just prove there was a contract you violated. You're now responsible. The other interesting thing, though, about contracts is this idea of a covenant not to compete. So sometimes when you are hired as an employee, in your employment agreement, there'll be a line that says, you promise if you leave this job, not to compete with us for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, not to compete in this geographic area. You're welcome to move to Ohio, but don't compete with me in California. These kinds of things. Covenants not to compete. And they are an interesting way to think back about trade secret law, as well as being important in their own right. What's interesting here? Well, with the covenant not to compete, I'm protecting more than my secrets. I have an employee, that employee might have been exposed to secrets, and if I make them promise not to compete with me, I'm limiting their ability to move those secrets to their next employer. If they can't work for that party, all of a sudden the secrets are a little more protected. But I'm protecting more, like if I've trained them, either firm-specific training or general training. So I hire, in law, we hire young lawyers at a school. The first year or two, they're doing a lot of learning. It makes them much more valuable as lawyers 2 years later. In the beginning, we're training them. And yes, some of that might be the secrets of my firm, our secret sauce. Some of it might be just firm-specific. Here's how we handle billing. And some of it, a lot of it, I think, is general training. Was teaching you how to move like a lawyer, how to write like a lawyer, was showing you that skill set. Trade secret law imperfectly protects this list. It might protect the secrets, it certainly doesn't protect the training. But covenants not to compete. All of a sudden, the rivals aren't going to get the benefits of the training I just invested in you. And that might be an interesting deal for you and I to make. Think of, again, young lawyers. Young lawyers are ridiculously overpaid. The first 2 years, they add very little value to the team, yet they're paid as, lawyers, like big numbers. And they like that. Like, they want to be paid well in the first couple years, even when they're not adding that much value. But then when you think about year 3, I need to kind of underpay them. They're now really well trained. They're not delivering real value. But if I overpaid them in years 1 and 2 while I trained them, I need to functionally underpay them in years 3 and 4 to make up for that gap. But of course, that's the moment when the young lawyer says, hey, maybe I'll go work for someone else. They won't underpay me. I'll knock on their door. I'll tell them about my great training. And there's this interesting bit that if I want to invest in you early in your career, I might want to reduce your mobility. That way, I invest in you, you become great, and I get some of that value before you leave the employment that we've invested in together. And covenants not to compete can do all of these things. Sometimes you see them because you have an employee who is going to be exposed to a lot of secrets. And I don't want to have to litigate those secrets. Which one did you take? When did you take it? Can I prove that you took it? Nah. I just want to say, look, you're working for Pepsi. You're not supposed to go work for Coke. As you work for Pepsi, you're going to learn all about our marketing plans, and inevitably, when you get to Coke, you take a bunch of secrets, covenant to compete. I mean, right ahead of time, part of our deal, here's your compensation, here's where you get a company car, here's the health insurance plan, and part of our deal is if this don't work out, you're not allowed to go work for Coke. Go work in a related industry maybe, but not for a competitor. Now, in some places, they're readily enforced, like in Boston, like Massachusetts. The view of the courts and the law in Massachusetts is, yeah, you can sign these deals, we'll enforce them. In California, by contrast, California state law says, no way, we really like mobility. And I think California is heavily influenced by Silicon Valley and how folks, I'm working for Google for a few months, then I jump ship to Facebook, spend a few years there, then I'm in Microsoft, right? We get a lot of mobility, which maybe leads to rapid innovation, in part because we do cross-pollinate a bunch of ideas. In California, the law is, we don't enforce these things. In Massachusetts, we do. There's then diverging views. There's been some policy work at the federal level thinking about maybe getting rid of these entirely. All I want to say to you is it's an interesting additional way to think about trade secrets. One way to protect information is to protect the information. Another way is to limit the flow of the people who know it. Covenants not to compete. And footnote me to you, I got other tricks like that too. For example, stock options that vest over time. It makes you want to stay, doesn't it? That might help me keep my information and keep it from you moving it elsewhere. To some degree, some perks, health plans and so on, might make you a little more sticky. Lots of ways to try to get your employees to stay put as a way of doing some of the work, at least of trade secret law, but through the people instead of through the information. Last thing I want to do in this video, because contracts are so common, I'm going to show you just one. And the one I want to show you is a standard confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. All of us will get asked to sign these things all the time. And it's a document that says, hey, I'm about to tell you something secret. You promise to treat it that way. They're very standard. I will tell you that there are a bunch of entities that refuse to sign these things. I just don't want to get into someday litigating whether or not they pass the information along. And we see this a lot in Hollywood. So like I am some big deal producer and I'm getting pitched. In general, I don't even let you pitch me because I want to say I never had access to your work. I couldn't have copied you. If I do let you pitch me, I might make you sign a document that says you waive all rights. I'm certainly going to be reluctant to sign a document that says I promise to keep your thing secret. And you can think of the dynamic. You're knocking on my door saying, I want to show you something. I won't tell you what it is. Sign a document. Well, no. And the Hollywood folks worry that you're going to show me an action adventure involving aliens in the morning, and someone else is going to knock on my door in the afternoon, and they're going to show me an action adventure involving aliens. And if I've signed all these contracts, somebody will get annoyed and sue and accuse me of sharing the information when in fact I didn't. And so a lot of Hollywood folks don't want to sign these sorts of confidentiality agreements. So too venture capitalists, same story. You think you're bringing me something I've never seen before. Odds are I'll see it 8 times today. I just don't want to get in the muck of signing contracts and having people accuse me of stuff. So there are parts of healthy business ecosystems where you just take the risk. You can't get one of these things signed or on the other side of the table, you just don't want to sign one of these things. It'll lead to inevitable litigation, even if you did right. That said, in a lot of other places, we do sign these. We see these all the time. And I just want to show you a little bit. So it's a confidentiality agreement. I edited this one, so it's between me, the recipient, and some other company I call Other, just to have an easy document to play with. The documents always have a paragraph like this defining proprietary information. What is the information I'm sharing that is going to be deemed to be protected by the deal? And it's not going to list out the factual details. It's a high level, right? Business plans, models, memoranda, studies, compilations. They're going to list out some vocabulary words to indicate this is the type of stuff I'm pushing across the table. We'll then have a clause about use, right? The recipient shall hold in strict confidence and shall not disclose any proprietary information to any other person. The recipient shall use the proprietary information only to assist Other, again, that's my counterparty, in pursuing a really cool real-world opportunity and for no other purpose. The contracts then will have a limitation. This is really important to make sure it's right in any deal you sign. And the idea of the limitation is to say, when you give me information, I am allowed to use it if a bunch of things happen. So if, for example, it turns out what you tell me wasn't secret at all. It was generally known, like look at A. It was generally known to the public at the time of the disclosure, or becomes generally known other than as a direct or indirect result of breach. So you give me something and I say right away, I say, whoa, no, that's not secret. It's public. Or it's secret and you give it to me and a year later everybody else knows it. Well, now I'm relieved of my burdens too. One escape valve has to be it's either known or becomes known. Another escape valve is it was rightly known by the recipient. So it might be something that the world in general doesn't know, but I happened to. So you show it to me under the contract, and right away I want a clause that says, well, that actually doesn't bind me. I already knew that. They didn't, the world. You did, and it turns out I did too. There's a third one here which is also important. It becomes known to the recipient through disclosure by sources other than this counterparty. So it might be you tell me something, later in the day, later in the year, later in the month, someone else tells me the same thing. I want to make sure that my commitment to you doesn't stop me from using information I got through some other clean path. You might add others depending on your setting, but the idea is some stuff is taken out of this deal because for any of these wonderful reasons, it was known for some other reason. It wasn't because of my breach of our relationship. I knew it already, it came to me and the like. I'll point out too, I tend to write these things with more than what the sample is. So this one says you can demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that you have one of these explanations. I often will add language that says if the counterparty plans to invoke one of these things, they have to tell me right away. I want notice. I don't want this to be something we litigate years later. So if I hand you information and you're thinking to yourself, I already know this, I want my contract to say, you've got to tell me that right away, otherwise you're not going to be allowed to say it later. I want clean notice right away at a time when I could grab my information back, at a time when I can say, balderdash, you didn't know this, and we could fight about it right while it's timely before you've done anything. I'll usually add language about if you plan to invoke one of these things, at the moment it becomes true, you must give me notice, rather than just invoking it later in a contract dispute. Those are the big ideas I wanted to share. The only thing I don't dig into heavily in either this video or the prior one is the federal law of trade secret law. Remember, I told you in the first video, we focused on the Uniform Trade Secret Act, which is this model sample bit of law that most of the states have covered, have adopted rather, have chosen to follow that model. There is federal law now, it's called the Defend Trade Secret Act. It follows the same rhythms. The main value is it gets you into other courts. So under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, you have an easier time getting into federal court to fight about these topics, which you might really want. Federal judges in the federal system tend to be fantastic. The district court judges, those entry-level judges who oversee the cases, yeah, there are some who are weaker than others, but overall the federal bench historically has been really good. Smart, engaged, the right amount of resources, get stuff done. And so the Defend Trade Secret Act opened the door to bringing these cases more readily in federal court, which is the big value. I don't focus it in our videos because we're doing a lot less about procedure. We're not really doing the full-on law school version of these topics. And so the difference between the federal and the state systems isn't so salient. And then the state systems, it's much richer. It's been going for so much longer that we have more sense of what all the words actually mean. And so I focus there.